video, I'm just going to go over a few things out of the tons and tons and tons of pieces of information available that shows that no one, not any single person, anywhere, anytime, can be required to receive a vaccination, or I'm sorry, a V. Okay, so this is the Office of the Law Revision Council, United States Code. Okay, so these are what the government works off of, okay? Every code has a list of acts of Congress, okay? And they all have to comply with the organic laws, especially the Constitution when it's the federal government doing something. The Constitution has to be strictly adhered to. It's not a guide. It's not advice. It's nothing like that. They have to abide by the Constitution. That's why they have an oath to uphold and defend it. Once they have an oath, they're considered members. Membership requires you to become a citizen, a federal citizen. Federal citizens have to be either born or naturalized in the United States. Then they become a United States citizen. The Constitution recognizes that a citizen of the United States is someone who's of the United States, and they work for the United States of America, which are separate people. So we go to Article 2. The President is the executive officer of the United States of America, and he's the commander-in-chief of the Army and Navy of the United States. Two different places. One works for the other, the United States. And the militia when it's called into service of the United States. So when the militia is called into service of the United States, they work for the United States. Otherwise, they're private citizens. That's why when they are working with the military, they're called privates. They're privates of the United States, working for basically our own defense. But there's two different places. There's the United States of America and there's the United States. The United States are the annexed lands, the lands that the states gave to the federal government for federal purposes. Federal purposes are defense with a C. Okay, so let's move beyond this. They have different types of laws. They have constitutional laws, and then they have contracts. Constitutional laws have an asterisk, but not all laws or not all titles with an asterisk are actually constitutional laws, because some of them have an asterisk, but they're not a constitutional law. So a constitutional law is given a positive law citation. We see positive law citation requirement in Title I, Chapter 3, Section 204A. You have the United States, and you have states created by the United States, and you have states that created the United States. This is in Black's Law Dictionary. One is a dependent state and one is an independent state. You have to understand sovereignty to understand this. What is sovereignty? Sovereignty is freedom, the right to do basically anything you want, but you gave up some sovereignty, or some people gave up some sovereignty to create a state. Settlers and inhabitants have all the sovereignty. They live off the land. The land is of God. God gave people land to live off of. He made people from the land. The sovereignty comes from the land and the people on the land who live on the land. The state does not actually live on the land in a way of speaking, but it's confined to some lands. That state was given some sovereignty to do some work for the people, the settlers and inhabitants. Those states got together and created the federal government for defense with the C purposes. They're restricted to smaller pieces of land. I go over this in the reports put out by Eisenhower in 1956 and 1957. You can watch those, and I go over everything more specifically and more detailed. So the courts of the United States are the courts created by positive law, because those are constitutional courts. There are courts on sort of federal lands that are not positive laws. And they have no authority because the federal government cannot give something authority which it doesn't have itself in the first place. The federal government was given a constitution and it has to take an oath to promise to abide by it. But what it did was it created organizations. And these organizations have been doing things outside the Constitution. And most people believe that these organizations are legitimate and they have some sort of power, but they don't. Because the CDC Foundation here, we see the CDC is a foundation. Established by Congress as an independent, nonprofit organization, the CDC Foundation is a sole entity authorized by Congress to mobilize philanthropic partners and private sector resources to support CDC's critical health protection mission. The problem is that they act like the CDC and the federal government acts like it has power and authority over everywhere, all the time, every person, every place, and it doesn't, because according to the Constitution, it's restricted to the lands it purchases for federal purposes, which is defense. Now, it can create a CDC foundation for the military and the seat of government. It cannot create a foundation regulating private people. And even though it does create a foundation, it's restricted to, it's a non-positive law. So let's go to public health and welfare. This has no asterisk. It's not a positive law. It means it's not in compliance with the Constitution. Therefore, nobody can be forced to do it or abide by it. Not even the military. And we know that because the military, many military members have been saying they're not going to get the vaccines. And there's nothing the government can do about it because the requirement to get a vaccine is in Title 42, and Title 42 is not a positive law, meaning it has no force, it has no sovereignty, it has no power. It's not in the Constitution. Chapter 4, viruses, serums, toxins, and antitoxins, etc. Does it make any sense that the federal government would be allowed to force people to get toxins in their body? I read something before from the Australian government, the West Australian government, saying that there's poison inside of it. That it's called a poison. Provided for regulation sale of interstate traffic of viruses, serums, toxins. Now, that does not mean that it has a right to regulate the state's traffic. That's saying that it has the right to regulate the federal government's traffic inside the state. And then it tells how it regulates it. Because the federal government only has authority over itself. District of Columbia regulation of sale of and interstate traffic in virus serums, etc. So what it's saying is that it has to control its traffic inside the state. So when it's driving through a state from one federal land to another federal land, it has the right to regulate that traffic. Because back in the old days, when people actually knew the maxims of law, etc., they knew that if someone come onto your land, you have a right to regulate it. So it's saying we have a right to regulate ourselves. And that the state is not going to limit, prohibit, stop, tax, or any of those things. Cause them to have a fee. Okay. So what it creates, it controls. So if it creates a system of transporting materials, it has to control that system, and it has to control it on when it's going through other people's lands. If someone wants to drive through my property, I can tax them because I haven't agreed not to. If the federal government wants to come on my land, I can tax them because I haven't ever agreed not to. Now, when the state creates roads, it lets the federal government use the roads. And the federal government is supposed to license the federal employees driving on state roads. That's where the license for the driver's license comes in. So being non-positive law, it's not a law everyone's required to follow. It's a law that the federal government makes for itself to figure out how to do things, to abide by contracts. It allows some corporations to help it, to do some work for it that it's not equipped to do or doesn't have the power to do, to help it move itself. That's what corporations do. They're a means to an end, a way to get from one place to another place. Once they achieve those ends, they're supposed to, historically, disband. The corporation just dismantles. Corporations are not supposed to be perpetual and immortal. They're supposed to end when the business is done. Okay, so if you are looking for information on vaccines, if you only understand a couple things, it's that the CDC is a foundation created by the federal government to help the federal government do some things outside of the Constitution. Those things are not positive law. Title 42, Public Health and Welfare, are not positive law because it has no positive law citation. Positive law citation requirement is Title 1, Chapter 3, Section 204A. Last sentence. We have a jurisdiction report, which I make videos on and go over. You can watch those, which show you, and I show proof, that the federal government, according to the Constitution, was given the right to regulate things on federal lands and between federal lands. If you go to those videos, you'll find the links. And you'll find links to several other papers and reports and manuals put out by the federal government, which tell you these things so that you can know that they're true. Okay, so no one's required to get a vaccine, and if your employer is requiring you to get a vaccine and you suffer some sort of injury from it, that's an OSHA recordable incident. That's an OSHA recordable injury. That's why businesses are no longer requiring it. They're just singling you out and making you feel like shit or whatever it is they're doing. Because these businesses are registered with the federal government. But there's no law requiring any business, any corporation to register with the federal government unless they're doing work for the Department of Defense on federal lands. And even then, you don't have to do work for the federal government. You can choose not to. That's in the Constitution, okay? So be free, like, share, subscribe, and know your rights.